How can you do all that needs done in life and still pursue your desire to learn French or the guitar or grow a plant or make art? You can't put a fiddle under your pillow and wake up playing it, though how cool would that be? But one thing we can do, no matter how chaotic and overwhelming life can be, is know that every tiny small motion in the direction of those endeavors really do matter. And not only that, they add up over time with great momentum. Join me, Fain, as I interview painters and gardeners, designers and musicians, photographers and cooks, creative livers of any kind who have somehow, in the middle of it all, continued on their creative paths, no matter what. Hello, sweet folks. Happy, warm, and sunny springtime to you all. A quick little note to say that if you are a lover of all things Instagram, come on over and say hey. You can find me and my artwork at Fain House, and you can find this podcast at Fain House Radio, a great place to see the faces behind the voices of the people in these interviews. Also, if you know anyone at all who might find support and inspiration from these conversations, please do tell them all about it. This is Fain House Radio, and I'm so glad you're here.
I am Zak Foster. I am from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I am a textile artist. I specialize in quilts, especially memory quilts and burial quilts. More and more lately, community quilts. The main creative endeavors of my life, I feel like so many folks around here that I'm a dabbler. I do a lot of different things. I have focused on textiles. But if I had to put things in an even bigger umbrella, I would just say how to live the good life is my main project, and I do that in a variety of ways. And quilting and making is just one of them. But I have been actively pursuing something like the life I'm living now for many, many years. I was a high school Spanish teacher for nearly 2 decades. I taught here in North Carolina and also up in Brooklyn, New York. It was an all right gig. I did right by my kids, but I was always on the prowl for something that resonated more deeply with who I knew myself to be. So about 145 days ago, who's counting? I got a little alarm that tells me that every morning because I'm celebrating this new life this new space I find myself in as a full-time artist and as the first artist in residence here at John C. Campbell Folk School.
What did it feel like when you decided to take the leap?
I consider myself very fortunate in that I've been planning my exit concretely for the last 5 years or so. I just didn't know exactly what the shape of the exit door would look like, but I knew that I was on my way out. And so I knew I wanted to set certain things up. And so I was able to, over time, build a really strong community on social media. Folks, respond to my work and like my work and support my work. During the pandemic, I created an online creative community that I call the Quilty Nook. And that's when I started to see the silhouette of the exit door, because everybody's got to make a livelihood. We all got bills to pay. We got to make money some way, somehow. I thought for a long time that was going to be through quilt making. And that still is a slice of the pie. As folks who are listening that are self-employed understand, the pie usually has several slices to it. Quilt commissions still are a slice of the pie. But what I'm most interested in doing right now with the community is bringing people together. For teaching is community building at its best. And that's the part of the job that I really loved. And that's the part of the job that I bring with me to the present day. Every year in September, I would get a brand new set of kids, 175 kids. And some of them knew each other, but most of them didn't. And it was my job to make them feel connected and at home and like we were working on a common goal together. And so those are the skills that I find that I can bring even more strongly, because now my whole heart's into it, because it is about exploring textiles, but more deeply also exploring ourselves and how we can put ourselves into our work. Because I believe that's when we do our best work, not when we're necessarily like exploring new techniques or trying new color palettes or whatever, the things that creative folks do to push our own back. I feel my experience has been that when I can dig in deep to the questions that I have about life and living and bring that to the fabric, that's when I produce my best work. And so I'm finding a lot of joy in helping other people connect to that in themselves.
It makes me think 2 things. One is, it's nice you're saying that you had luck in there, but I think you clearly get a lot of credit for foresight and planning and thoughtfulness for where you wanted to go. And the other thing it makes me think is sometimes when we're having a day job, not sure what exactly to call it, but we might think, well, I'm not living my passion. I'm not, doing my craft or whatever, but it's not wasted time because any job we ever had was a stepstone to the next. And then, like you're saying, you're using elements of that in what you're doing right now. And that is so cool.
Well, 100%. So, I mean, Annie Fain, I'll tell you that I'm a Virgo through and through. And so that planning comes with the territory, although I think fabric has loosened me up a little bit. I'm a little more like my moon sign in the last few years, which is Aquarius, a little bit more the dreamer. But I would also say that the framework that I came to peace with in the last several years of my teaching career was that it allowed me to be my own patron, right? I wasn't beholden to anybody. Well, other than the Department of Education in New York City, I wasn't beholden to anybody when it came to my art, right? I can make whatever I wanted to make. And so there's a lot of freedom in that I enjoyed at the time. And that also lent a sense of integrity to that chapter of life, right? That maybe I wasn't spending my mornings and afternoons the way that ideally I would, but I was investing in my art at the same time in the evenings and the weekends. And I was investing in a future where art could take fuller stage in my life.
Right. Like it took the pressure off of trying to make your whole money from it so you could just play and let it develop and let it marinate.
At the same time, though, it also felt like I've been working 2 jobs for the last decade. So,
Totally.
It's a lot. I don't want to diminish that. It's a lot, but we work hard so that things happen. Right.
Well, that's right. And, all the social media stuff, the presence that you have, the beautiful images you share, it takes time. It really does take time. So, yeah, I hear you. The side hustle part of it that you had to juggle. When you were a kid, did you like making things?
Oh, sure. So many things. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think of my childhood and making an art is that my mom, first artist I ever knew, she was a calligrapher. She did a lot of calligraphy when I was growing up. And so I can remember her sitting at the table. She had this special writer's desk that was slant up so you can get the proper angle of the pen nib to the paper. And she modeled for me that form is important. Practice is important, right? Because I would see her going through sheets and sheets and sheets of practicing this calligraphy. And it wasn't the final project. It was just warming up the hand. She also had huge manila envelopes, one for each of me and my brothers. I'm the oldest of 3 boys. And so they must have been, as kids, they felt like the size of a car, but I'm sure they're probably 3 feet by 5 feet, something like that. And every piece of artwork that we brought home from school went in our respective envelope. And I didn't appreciate how special that was, of course, as a kid. But as an adult looking back, that is my mother saying everything matters, right? Every piece you make has something special, has a spark, has a nugget in there that is worth holding on to. Right. Now, of course, at some point, we got to learn to let go of some of these things, but we can't hold on to every piece we ever make. But it was it felt like a confirmation or an affirmation of what we were doing as kids, as young artists, budding artists, that I feel very thankful for, even to this day.
I love that. I don't know, just sometimes as adults or parents, we don't have to be a parent. We could be an adult near a child. We don't even realize the encouragement we're sending them in these small ways. And it's really powerful. I like that. Of course, there are a million mediums that exist on the planet and things to play with and explore with. And how did quilting become your medium?
I've long time considered myself a creative person, but I've always experimented with different techniques and different media. So I've done screen printing, linoleum cutting, drawing, photography, painting, sculpture. And it wasn't until my friends started having their first kids, that season of life when all your friends are getting pregnant and having children. I was like, well, I want to make them something special, something they just can't buy off the rack. And so I made my first baby quilt 10 years ago this month. And it was a very humble quilt. It was a humble offering. But what I love about it is that when I look back at that first quilt that I made, there are certain through lines, there are certain threads of continuity between what I'm doing today and what I did in that first quilt. That first quilt had salvaged material, scrap material, repurposed, which is something that it makes up the core of what I do today. And it was supposed to be like a pinwheel block for all my quilters out there. They know the pinwheel block is a classic, but I couldn't get my points to line up just right. So there's something kind of wonky about it. and wonky. It's a big, big part of what I do today too. I'm not a very precise quilter for anyone who knows my work.
I don't know. It makes me think like we're all the essence of us always. You know, like you were already there in that first quilt and then you're just expanding more on you or something like that.
You can't help but be yourself.
Exactly.
We try really hard to be something we're not. Like speaking personally, right? I've spent plenty of time trying to be somebody else, but I feel like as I get older, I'm getting wiser. I'm getting rid of the junk and I'm just paring down to the essentials.
Not everyone listening knows of the John C. Campbell Folk School, and you're the first artist in residence that the school has ever had. It's a new program. It's really special. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
I have long wanted to do a residency of some kind, but it just never clicked with an academic calendar. And so when I saw this was being offered, I thought, what a great way to initiate a new career in the arts, you know, a new way to celebrate. So I found out about this residency because when I was first, when I could tell that like the end was nigh, I was leaving teaching. My partner, who was very supportive, was trying to find ways for me to sustain myself and pay my bills, AKA freaking out, right?
Yeah, totally. Like, here we go. It's like, I want you to follow your dreams, but what about those bills?
Right. And so he I guess was just researching online, you know, North Carolina artist opportunities, which is always a great thing for any creative to Google because there's always more out there than we realize. He's like, well, here's something. Just half-heartedly kind of sent it to me. Here's a little something. And I read it and I said, this is it. And I just knew deep down, I'm like, this is it. The reason it appealed to me, because there are several residencies out there. I consider art to be at its best when it comes from the people, right? Like when it's not, nothing against galleries in the art world, but like when it's publicly accessible, when it's relatable, when it's digestible and understandable, when you feel like you can connect to it, when it's democratic with a lowercase d, when it's in line with a certain set of traditions that have been cultivated over time, but also has space for innovation, all these things. So those are my personal values. And then here's this place, the folk school, who has many of those same values. And so when I was looking at other residencies that felt more fine arts oriented, I could squeeze myself in there, but I don't think it'd be as comfortable a fit as being here. And that's panned out to be true. So the situation is pretty sweet. So anybody who's out there is thinking about, do I want an artist residency? Here's the deal, at least as it stands for me. And I'm the first one, so things may change. If you're listening in the future, things may change. But you know, they've given me a place to sleep at night, so I don't got to worry about that. They give me 3 meals a day, so I don't even have to think about what kind of peanut butter and jelly sandwich am I going to make myself today. And there's a little monthly stipend, right? So all of that takes a huge weight off. There's very little expectations other than, you know, one, I show up for open studios once a week and I engage the community in my work that way. I have also taken it on myself to make the projects I'm working on community projects. So not only are the open studios a portion of it, but I'm working on a series of quilts I'm calling the homecoming quilts. The dream there is to, when the tops are done and it comes time to quilt them all up, I love to have a quilting bee and have folks here in the community come out and help me with that. Because I've come to find so many of the projects that I've been envisioning in the last several months of my life as I've gone full time all have a community piece to them. And I'm starting to view quilts, but also as just excuses to get together and reasons to tell stories, right? And so I'm thinking of this homecoming series as what a great way to explore with other people, to hear other folks' stories about their relationship to home. Because some people stay in one place their whole life. That's a beautiful thing. Some people look at some big shiny city and say, that's my home. And they go there, and that's a beautiful thing. Some people go to those big cities and realize that's not their home and they come back. That's my story. You know, so there's so many rich tales out there that if we had the chance to tell them, we would realize, I think, that there's a lot of connection there. Another community quilt that I am working on at the same time, I just keep having these ideas. I mean, I gotta slow down, anything. I gotta slow down. But another one is it's a 2-part quilt series. It's the Paradise quilt and the Cataclysm quilt. The Paradise quilt is the community one. I call it a community two ways quilt because I reached out to folks on social media and I said, could you please send me just a small scrap of leafy green material? And so folks have been doing that. And the idea there is when folks come through for open studio once a week, we sit down together and we just hand piece. I show them hand stitches if they need to learn how to do that. When we're handling this leafy green material, and the idea is at some point we just kind of naturally segue to talking about our place in the natural world. I want to hear stories about when folks felt at one with the larger world that we live in, when folks felt a certain special kind of connection. How long has that been for people? Is this in recent memory or is this in childhood memory? What does that memory mean to you today after you've had some time to incorporate it into your experience? I'm interested in helping people connect with the awareness that we all are part of a much larger world. That's the Paradise quilt. So that's going to be a beautiful leafy green quilt. And I'm going to put in some bright patches here and there for the fruits and the flowers. The Cataclysm quilt was inspired by a poet, Jane Hirschfield, who wrote a poem called Cataclysm. And it is the softest, most heartfelt take on climate change I've ever heard. It's just absolutely gorgeous. She herself is a trained Zen Buddhist. Because of that, she has a way of coming at controversial issues, things that can be really tricky for people to talk about, in a way that is soft and non-threatening, engaging, but not doesn't raise hackles, And so that poem of hers, Cataclysm, for me represented the kind of approach that I want to embody personally, which is we got to deal with some tough issues as a community together. But that doesn't mean we got to beat each over the head with the problems that we got to solve, right? There's ways to talk about it. And so that poem inspired this quilt series, and we'll see where it goes.
Well, I mean, it's going to go somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. It's got to go somewhere.
It's got to go somewhere, man. It's going to be something. It's going to be great. It's very special to have other people touch an art project that's happening. On one hand, we want to control things, but what you're talking about, everybody's length of stitch will be different. Some will be clean, some will be messy. And then, like you're saying, when your hands are busy, you start talking in an easier way. And the other thing it makes me think is stitching by hand a quilt takes a lot of time and many, 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 many kabillions of little stitches, which of course we've got many, many people on the planet with all their, thoughts and things and feelings. And in a way is taking less time because everybody's in on it. It's redundant to say like Sesame Street, cooperation makes it happen. But I don't think this is cliche at all. You have a beautiful way of talking about it and including everybody. And it's going to be very fun to see, where it goes for sure.
I've been thinking more and more about why community is important in these projects. And it's not, my first thought was that, things get done faster. My father-in-law likes to say that the Army did a study, and I don't even know, this might be apocryphal. I don't even know if this is true, but the Army did a study that 2 people can make 2 beds faster working together than 2 people working separately. So there is something about efficiency, of course, that I like. I like to get projects done as opposed to let them remain undone. But it's not just that. There's also something about the richness of when everybody brings their offerings to the floor. Like I'm one person with one perspective, a limited perspective at that. But if we all start sharing stories, what could happen? And so when I say that I'm starting to see quilts as just an excuse to get together, that's what I'm talking about. Like what is that magic, that spark that can happen when people feel like they're in a comfortable space, they can talk and they can share.
Totally. And you're welcoming the offerings. Everybody has offerings, but we're not always in a scenario where those are welcomed or set up in a way we could actually express it. Another project you're working on is your podcast that's called Seamside. And the image of the icon that goes with it is the backside of a stitched quilt square. People should definitely go check it out. I was looking at some of the reviews and I'd like to quote one of them in encouragement of people going to check it out. This person said, if you're an artist, a sewist, a lover of things slow and gentle, or fond of meaningful conversation, please don't miss this podcast. There's a quality of genuine humanness that makes these conversations so relatable that I feel like I'm stitching along with friends. How has it felt having these conversations and starting something like this? It's another example of it's quilt related, but it's not like you're selling a quilt that hangs on a wall. You are folding it into another way to share that's audio. What's that felt like?
It ties together pretty neatly with this community quilting bee instinct that's been developing over time recently, that I want to hear what's out there, what people are working on. And if a quilt is an excuse to get together, well, so is a podcast, right? Like I can see artists doing work that I admire, that I have questions about, and I want to know more about. And I can be like, hey, you want to be a guest on the podcast? And we can chat a little bit. Then to be able to turn that around to something that also benefits other people. We have all these like mini quilting bees happening all over the place, where it's a conversation between me, the person I'm talking to, and the person who's listening. Yeah, so I got the idea for seam side. It's a word I like a lot. Points to the backside of a piece of patchwork, the inside that will eventually get covered up when you make the quilt, no longer visible. And so what I'm interested in talking to folks about is the inner work of cloth. How has working with your chosen material shown you something about life? How has it changed you as a person? That's what I want to talk about. So, we're not having so much conversations about technique or like even our own artistic practice as much as we are philosophy and living. All right. And we just do that through the guise of our making. That's the kind of conversation I really enjoy engaging in. And so I've been really encouraged that other people are enjoying listening to the conversations. So it's funny because it started as a zine project. And then like, well, I might as well record the conversations just for archival purposes. But now it's become like a podcast. Things have their own life and they grow. And so it is a two-part project. It is podcast and it is zine. So I sit down, I talk with somebody for an hour. We'll sit and we'll sew at the same time. We'll have our conversation the way it goes. Then after that conversation, I sit down and reflect on certain points that stood out to me. And usually I wait a couple of days to see what kind of floats to the top. And then in the zine, I'll offer like further reflections on what I've been thinking about since that conversation. So they dovetail very nicely together. One potential universe that could spin out of all this is I would love to make a book out of it at some point. This idea of sitting down and talking with people about how working with cloth makes us more human. What does that allow us access to that we didn't have access to before? I envision a lot of really beautiful photographs and the essays. I'd write the essays. That's the dream. But for now, even if that particular universe doesn't spin off into existence, I am thoroughly enjoying the process of getting to know people via these conversations and then making the zines. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's also a lot of fun.
Well, if anybody watches the video later, you have to watch this part because when Zak's talking about his dream, he's got that dream look on his face and it's so wonderful. And we just have this dream and you're clearly like so excited and connecting almost like vibrationally, visually with it, with what might happen. And it's also fun to think about people probably are stitching or working on something with their hands while they're listening. That's the beauty of audio. And in the episode with Beverly Smith, she shared very emotional things and super heartfelt, super connected to family and sorrow and all kinds of stuff and rounded back to happiness. I was curious about the zine side of the project because, like we were talking before, editing and creating a podcast is like very labor intensive. And then I was like, wow. And he's doing a zine on top of that. So how are you printing that? How do people see it, once you've made it?
Yeah, the zines, the reason they're sustainable is that they're just a one-page printable, downloadable file. So I'm not working with any actual products here, It's just a link you can download. At this point, I basically have a template, and it's a template I was using back in the classroom. You take a sheet of printer paper, it's 8 panels. Well, 2 of them are always going to be the front and the back cover, so that leaves you 6. And so then you go filling it in like that. And so it doesn't, now that I'm on a roll, the zine actually doesn't take that much work. It's the podcast.
So if people are looking for that link, they go to your website?
zakfoster.com/seamside.
Yoo-hoo. When you describe your podcast, exploring how textiles make us more human. And so what have you learned so far about how working with textiles does make us more human? And how are you folding that into everything else?
It's still a young project, but my personal experience has been, and the people I've talked to echo this, that working with material, whether it's fabric or wood or metal or glass, I think it's all the same. I think it's inconsequential what material you're working with. For me, it just happens to be textiles. It gives us a safe space to try new things, to risk, to ask questions, and then to see if it works or not. If it works, then we try something a little riskier next time. And we just keep pushing that boundary. With improv quilting, which is the style of quilting where there is no pattern, you're just kind of making up as you go. Improv quilting has taught me that mistakes can be the artist's best friend, that we can use those moments where things don't go according to plan as a launch pad for something that we hadn't even previously envisioned. What I feel like I'm learning through quilting, and what I hear the people I talk to say about their own personal practice, is that working with textiles is like a little laboratory where you can say, okay, these two patches didn't go according to plan, but I really kind of like this one aspect about them. And if you can see it happen to something that you can hold in your hands, well, it gives you the language, it gives you the vocabulary, it gives you the muscle memory to try it in other arenas of your life as well. So when things out in the world, in the job, in your family, in your religious community, whatever it is, when things don't go according to plan, how do you respond? And you have those tools. You've developed those tools in a safe space. And so what it's taught me is that it widens our human experience by working with these materials, by giving us permission to step outside of these little boxes that we tend to put ourselves in and try something new and see what happens.
Instead of rationally thinking about giving yourself permission or rationally thinking your way through, like, I should forgive myself or mistakes are okay. What you're saying is through doing it with your body, it's almost like a brain and emotional training. And then you redo and you build this muscle and you keep realizing more and more, like, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. And that's part of what is super gorgeous about it.
100%. One of the workshops that I have developed recently, and I love it, I can't wait to be able to offer it again, is called Moon Mandala. I ask people to commit to a daily mandala drawing practice. And then we get together once a week for a month to talk about insights that arise through those mandala drawings. For folks that might not know what mandalas are, they're intuitive drawings that you're really not supposed to think about it. You just kind of grab colored pencils and you go to town. But what comes out of those conversations when we meet once a week? We know we got the person's mandala project up on the screen and they're talking. Some deep and real stuff comes out. And I think the trick there is the same trick that happens when we're working with cloth or whatever our chosen material is, that when we have a canvas that we can move the spotlight from ourselves, which is a very charged, complex thing, when we can move that spotlight away from that to a third party, the thing that we're making, it frees us up to talk about it in a way that is accessible and more comfortable. And so I think there's many ways to get to those spaces where we do feel more open and more comfortable to experiment. Craft is one, mandala drawing is one, religious practice is one. There's just many ways to get there in my mind.
Do you think that's why for us humans, it feels so good to make things?
We are problem-solving monkeys. That's what we are. Right. And so I feel like, yes, if we're not actively seeking to problem solve, to resolve, to leave this place a little better than we found it, tie up at least one or two loose ends, if we're not actively doing that, we're going to feel less than satisfied.
Yeah.
I took a wood turning class recently. I've never worked on a power machine like a lathe, but the things that unlocked in me creatively, my grandfather was a woodworker. And so I felt a strong sense of connection with him, and he's been passed away now for 20 some years. And so you just don't know what you're going to get out of a new experience.
We were talking about, grew up in North Carolina, go to New York City, come back again. And also your homecoming quilts and sense of home in general is like super intriguing to you right now. What would you say about all that?
I feel like moving to New York made me more of a Southerner. Right? That I don't feel like I was a Southerner when I was living in North Carolina before I left. And I say that because, for a lot of reasons, but one, before I moved to New York, and I moved in 2008, so I was whippersnapper, 28 years old. I was a young queer person who was trying to fit into a scene where it wasn't always comfortable to be who I was. And so because it wasn't comfortable, I was trying to set myself apart. Looking back, I can see this now. I was trying to set myself apart from the South at large, air quotes, the South. And so I think inadvertently I was doing things like trying to drop the accent or neutralize the accent, dress a certain way, wear my hair a certain way, all these things, cultivate certain kinds of interests, things like that. And I get to New York where I thought I was going to like fit right at home because I was highly cultured. And I was like, oh, this ain't it for me either. This ain't it for me either. And that's when I started quilting. I don't know if I would have ever quilted if I hadn't moved to New York. That'd be an interesting mystery I'll just have to live with. There's no way to ever find out. But something about getting distance from home helped me see it more clearly, see myself in home more clearly. And I began to understand the roots that were resonating with me. I had an interesting moment at one point in time where I was sitting in a meeting at work. This had been at school. And there was an instructor there from the Bronx who started talking about how she often felt judged for having that thick Bronx accent. And there was a point where she was actively trying to neutralize that accent. And I was like, boy, do I know that story. And ever since then, I've tried to be intentional about not neutralizing the accent. It makes me think of something that a drag queen used to say, which is sometimes it takes a lot of work to be your real self, right? Sometimes we really do have to work at stripping away everything and just focusing on who we are. And I find myself wondering, what did my grandfather sound like when he spoke? Like I asked my family if we had recordings. I wanted to hear it. We don't have any. But there is an intentional cultivation of my connection to my roots that I'm exploring right now. And I think quilting is part of that. I think being here at the folk school is part of that. This is a chance for me. One of the reasons why this residency was so appealing was it gave me a chance to get back on the home territory a little bit and just see what does it feel like to come back to my home state 15 plus years later and find what is my position in this new place. So that's one of my personal projects that I'm working on while I'm here.
What have been one of the biggest struggles you've had staying on your creative path?
Well, if I could tweak the question a little bit, I might say one of the biggest hurdles I've had was figuring out how to leave the full-time job and become a full-time artist. That was the creative project of a lifetime. That's like the building of the Hoover Dam, right? Like it was a lot. Day-to-day struggle would be just finding the time to do everything I want to do. I got this fiery furnace inside of me. I just want to sit around and make stuff all the time. But like, if I can figure out how to like make stuff and eat at the same time, make stuff and sleep at the same time.
Wouldn't that be great?
Stuff and write emails at the same time, then I'll have the secret figured out.
I'm sure you have a thing, which I also have, which is while I'm working and doing that handwork, I'll think of the next new idea. So then you go work on that idea. And then while you're doing that, you have a quietness while you're working, and then you get this next idea. So it's not a boring life. You're clearly not bored.
Not at all. And I think, some people think, oh, you're moving to the country, you're going to be so bored. What are you going to do? You don't have restaurants and Broadway and galleries. And I'm like, I don't need that stuff. I'm fine. I actually want to strip away all of those distractions, those, people inviting you to do stuff all the time. No, actually, I just want to sit around and carve on this little wooden bear for a little while. And that sounds like a dream,
Totally. Yeah. Being social is like a part-time job,
It really is. I ain't got time for that.
I got time for that. And you're like, friends, clog your ears. I'm not talking about you.
No, because honest to God, so I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, but one of the things that's filling my inspiration cup while I'm here and keeping me going are the people and the community, right? It's just like the conversations I'm having and just the way of being in the world that so many people embody here at the folk school. That's really like given me a lived example of what life can be like. So definitely. I joke about socializing, but it really does mean connecting with others really is vitally important to me at this point.
We definitely need both, but we have to keep in mind that one way that we avoid our dreams sometimes is just to keep us busy with hanging out with people. So we still need the people, but we just have to like stay aware of that. What are you most excited about for the next year?
Well, 2022 is just a big old question mark. I'll be honest with you. So we'll see what the universe decides to spin itself into existence. I'm excited about potentially moving back home. We're going to wait for the housing market to rationalize itself a little bit, and then I'll move back home. So I'm hoping that's happening sooner rather than later. I'm excited to see where this podcast project goes. I mean, that really is my big project of the year. In and of itself, it is a beautiful goal. If it evolves into something else, that'll also be a fun ride to go on. I'm looking forward to the people I'm going to meet and the experiences I'm going to have.
So to wrap it up, you're really excited to be live.
Yeah, if I had to put a word on it, yeah. I'm excited to be alive this year. Sure am.
What is filling your inspiration cup these days?
Well, the people, we've talked about that. I would also say another aspect of people would be just being in a place like this where everyone is interested in making something. Everyone's engaged in that process of creation is a really inspiring thing. So just like the vibe, the communal vibe of creative energy here is really a beautiful thing. I'm going to say the lunchtime jams, the music jams, folks getting together and playing music at lunch, music's got a way, and I know I don't got to tell you this, music's got a way of just drawing out all those unspoken, unrealized, unfelt feelings. It has a way of bringing out those unfelt feelings. And so I really enjoy just those daily snippets of live music, which is really sweet. Maybe similarly, I'm really enjoying the birds of this area. So I wake up in the morning and I'll go sit on the front porch of the cottage here and I just listen. There's a verse out of Psalms. I've started reading the Bible lately. There's a verse out of Psalms that says, "Let me hear the sounds of joy and gladness." And that's what I think when I sit on the front porch in the morning with my coffee, listen to birds. Let me hear the sounds of joy and gladness. Because it's like these birds, they just get turbocharged with the rising sun and they turn that solar energy into music. And that music comes into me somehow. I turn it into something else and the chain continues,
That's fun because we're so lucky the birds are there. And then you're associating this reminder for yourself to them. And then they're always there. So you're always going to be reminded.
I would encourage anybody, because I never considered myself much of a birder before the last year or two, but just get to know one or two birds that you find yourself hearing all the time. There are apps for it. You can find an app for it. Get to know one or two birds, because what starts to happen is you're walking down wherever you're walking and you hear your little Carolina wren singing. Carolina wren's a great one to start with if you're here in the Western North Carolina area. And then you're like, oh, that's not just a bird. That's a wren. And then what starts to happen is you realize it sings different kinds of songs at different times of day. And that's a beautiful thing. And all of a sudden, what starts to happen is this world is not just full of capital B birds, but it's full of Carolina wrens and downy woodpeckers and nuthatches and phoebes and all kinds of things. And it's helped me feel part of the matrix, part of something bigger.
Do you have any last words of encouragement for everybody out there just trying their best to make and do and fold creativity into the, sometimes the grind of daily life?
Well, one thing that really helped me when I was still doing the full-time job, like I mentioned, was to remember that I was my own patron and I was paying my own way in that sense. That was a really helpful framing. Two, I would say that even if you can't, this is how it felt for me a long time. I couldn't see the exact shape of my dream for a long time. I knew it was out there. I could feel it drawing me towards it, but I couldn't see the shape. And because I couldn't see the outline and know the details of how it would come into being, for a while that was anxiety producing, right? Like knowing you want this thing, but not being able to define the thing you want was a source of stress for me for a while. But I came to peace with that eventually. Just realize as I get closer to it, I will see it more clearly. And when it's time to jump, I'll know it. And that's how it panned out for me. When it was time to jump, I knew it and I jumped, and here I am talking to you today this morning. And I would say when it comes to making art, you can't mess it up, right? The only thing you could do to mess it up is to not do the thing. So just jump in, play, have fun, experiment. Don't try to make anything that has meaning. Don't try to make anything deep. Just start and come from that place of curiosity, and you can't help but make something with meaning and significance for yourself.
If you would like to be in touch, email me at afainhouse@gmail.com. If you would like to watch these interviews in video form and are curious about the happenings of my little business called Fain House, where I paint and make art prints and gift cards from my watercolor originals, I'd love for you to sign up for my email list. When you do, you get a coupon for 10% off a one-time purchase in my Etsy shop and first dibs on my annual limited edition calendar printing. You will also be granted access to our free private Facebook group, which is the one spot you can watch these interviews. If this all sounds fun to you, go to your web browser and type bit.ly/Fainhouse to sign up. This is not a weekly newsletter, but rather a list of folks who are interested in hearing from me time to time. You can find this link, as well as links for each person I interview, in the show notes of each episode. I'm Annie Fain Barrelon. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll leave you with a quote for the day. Much like a patchwork quilt, inspiration that stirs and motivates us is made of many things. Robert Reynolds.